The communication room at Terran Defense Station Omega-7 was unusually quiet that morning. Captain Minho sat at his desk, reviewing routine patrol reports when the main receiver suddenly burst to life with crackling static. The sound was so unexpected that several technicians jumped from their seats. Lieutenant Sujin was the first to react, her hands flying across the control panel as she tried to clean up the signal. The static was unlike anything they had encountered before. It carried an urgency that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing and listen. "Captain, we're getting something on the emergency channels," Sujin called out, her voice tight with concentration. "It's alien in origin, but the translation matrix is working on it." Minho stood up and walked over to the main console. He had been stationed on Omega-7 for 3 years now, and in all that time, they had never received a direct alien transmission. Earth's colonies were still relatively new to the galactic community, and most alien species preferred to communicate through official diplomatic channels. The static gradually cleared, and a voice emerged from the speakers. It was high-pitched and melodic, unlike any human voice, but the universal translator was doing its job. The words that came through made everyone in the room freeze. "This is Elder Solana of the Vellani colony on Kepler 442b. We are under immediate threat of invasion by the Hegemony Empire. Our defenses are minimal. We have no military capabilities. They will be here within days, and we cannot escape. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help. We are sending this plea on all emergency frequencies to any civilized species within range." The message repeated 3 times before cutting to static again. The communication room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the equipment. Min felt his stomach tighten as he realized what they had just heard. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Hegemony Empire. They were the nightmare that peaceful species whispered about in their sleep. For 200 years, they had swept across the outer rim of the galaxy, conquering world after world. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they enslaved entire populations, stripping planets of resources and leaving nothing but empty husks behind. Sujin pulled up the star charts on her screen. "Sir, Kepler 442b is way out in the frontier sector. It's at least 15 days by hyperspace jump from the nearest Galactic Council station. Even if they wanted to help, they couldn't get there in time." Minho studied the tactical display. The Vellani homeworld appeared as a small blue dot surrounded by vast empty space. It was incredibly isolated, which probably explained why the hegemony had targeted it. No one would come to help, because no one could reach them quickly enough. The captain thought about the voice they had just heard. There had been such desperation in it, but also dignity. Elder Solana had not begged or offered bribes. She had simply stated their situation and asked for help, knowing that the odds of anyone responding were almost 0. "Lieutenant, patch me through to Fleet Command on Earth," Minho ordered. "Priority Alpha transmission." Sujin looked surprised. "Sir, are you sure? This isn't really our sector, and Fleet Command has been very clear about not getting involved in frontier conflicts without direct authorization from the Galactic Council." Minho nodded grimly. He knew the regulations as well as anyone. Humanity was still proving itself to the galactic community. They were seen as newcomers, aggressive, and unpredictable. Getting involved in conflicts without permission could damage Earth's standing with other civilized species. But as he listened to the Vellani distress call, repeating in the background, Minho realized that some things were more important than diplomatic protocols. The Vellani were about to be wiped out, and everyone who received their message would find reasons not to help. Everyone except humans, perhaps. They had a strange reputation in the galaxy, a species that came from a world so dangerous that it had forged them into something different. Other aliens called them Deathworlders, and spoke of their tendency to attempt impossible rescues and fight hopeless battles. Maybe it was time to live up to that reputation. The Vellani distress call spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours, Every major communication hub had received and analyzed the transmission. In the grand chambers of the Galactic Council, on the neutral world of Concordia, emergency sessions were being called to discuss the crisis. The council chamber was a magnificent sight, a crystalline dome that stretched high into the sky, filled with representatives from over 50 different species. The spider-like arachnids scuttled nervously on their 8 legs, their mandibles clicking in rapid conversation. Above them, the Ariels floated in their containment suits, their gaseous bodies shifting through worried shades of purple and orange. Elder Velt, an ancient being whose species resembled walking trees, stood at the center of the chamber. His bark-like skin was marked with centuries of wisdom, and when he spoke, others listened. But today, his words carried a tone of inevitability that made everyone uncomfortable. "We all know what will happen next," he said, his voice creaking like old wood. "The humans will respond to this call. The Deathworlders always do." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the assembled delegates. Some species clicked, others chirped, and a few released pheromone clouds that their translators converted into worried murmurs. Everyone knew the stories about humanity, even if they preferred not to discuss them in polite company. 3 years ago, when the passenger liner Serenity had been caught in the gravity well of a collapsing star, every rescue ship in the sector had declared the situation hopeless. The physics were clear. No ship could get close enough to the event horizon and escape again. The 2,000 passengers from 12 different species were written off as lost. Then a human salvage crew had showed up in a ship that was barely holding together. They had jury-rigged their engines with parts that shouldn't work together, flown through radiation that should have killed them, and somehow pulled every single passenger to safety. When asked why they had attempted such an impossible rescue, the human captain had simply shrugged and said, because they needed help. The story had become legend throughout the galaxy, but it wasn't unique. Humans had a disturbing habit of treating impossible situations as minor inconveniences. They were the species that had colonized worlds other races considered uninhabitable. They were the ones who volunteered for the most dangerous assignments and somehow survived missions that killed seasoned veterans from warrior species. Other aliens had started calling them Deathworlders, beings who had evolved on a planet so hostile that it had shaped them into something the galaxy had never seen before. Sol 3, or Earth, as the humans called it, was a world of extremes. Massive storms that could flatten cities, temperature swings that would kill most species, and natural disasters that occurred with terrifying frequency. Most species would have gone extinct on such a world. Humans had thrived. On Earth, in the underground command center of Terra Naval Headquarters. Commander G1 was reviewing the Villani transmission for the 5th time. She was a small woman by human standards, but her dark eyes held the kind of intensity that made even veteran officers step carefully around her. The command center buzzed with activity as duty officers monitored communications from across human space. Earth's colonies were spread thin across dozens of systems, and coordinating their defense was a complex task. But G1's attention was focused entirely on the tactical display showing the Villani system. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Dongmin from his station. "Fleet Command is still waiting for authorization from the Galactic Council before we can respond to the distress call. Protocol requires." "I know what protocol requires," G1 interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "How long would it take to get the 7th Fleet to the Villani system?" Dongmin checked his calculations. 14 days, ma'am. But that's cutting it very close. Intelligence reports suggest the Hegemony main fleet will arrive in 16 days. G1 nodded slowly. The math was tight, but possible. The question was whether they should wait for official permission or act on their own initiative. In the 3 years since humanity had joined the galactic community, they had been very careful to follow all the rules and protocols. They were still the newcomers, still proving that they could be trusted. But as she listened to Elder Solana's voice, pleading for help, G1 realized that some things were more important than diplomatic protocols. The Galactic Council would debate and discuss while an entire species faced extinction. That wasn't the human way. Without saying another word, she began accessing the fleet deployment codes. The 7th Fleet consisted of 12 ships and over 4,000 personnel. Moving them without authorization would end her career and possibly damage Earth's standing in the galactic community. She started typing the deployment orders anyway. Word of the human fleet movement spread quickly through the galaxy's unofficial communication networks. These were the channels used by smugglers, mercenaries, and species that preferred to operate away from the Galactic Council's watchful eyes. Within hours, the news had reached some very unexpected corners of known space. On the volcanic world of Pyros, where rivers of molten lava carved glowing paths through black stone mountains, General Krekstar received the transmission in his command bunker. The massive saurian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his reptilian hide marked with scars from a lifetime of warfare. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light as he read the decoded message on his tactical display. The humans were mobilizing their 7th Fleet to help the Villani. They were doing it without official authorization, risking their standing with the Galactic Council for a species they had never even met. Krekstar's scarred mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. General called his aide, a younger saurian named Vexka. Should we report this to High Command? Krekstar was quiet for a long moment, his clawed fingers drumming against the metal table. His mind drifted back 3 years, to the darkest period in saurian history. A plague had swept through their nursery worlds, killing thousands of eggs before they could hatch. Their own medical science had been powerless to stop it. Then the humans had arrived. They weren't supposed to be in saurian space. It was restricted territory. But somehow they had heard about the plague and come anyway. Their medical teams had worked day and night alongside saurian healers, sharing techniques that no other species had been willing to reveal. Krekstar remembered watching human doctors stay awake for 48 hours straight, fighting to save saurian eggs that weren't even their own species. They had asked for nothing in return, not even recognition. When the plague was finally defeated, they had quietly left, refusing all offers of reward. Contact the 3rd Assault Flotilla, Krekstar growled to his aide. Tell them to prepare for immediate departure. Sir, where are we going? The old general's eyes glowed brighter. We have a debt to repay. Meanwhile, in the vast construction spheres that orbited the distant star, Kepler 186, the Insectoid Collective was hard at work on their endless building projects. These massive structures stretched for hundreds of miles in diameter, filled with millions of worker drones constructing everything from starships to space habitats. Queen Builder, Jixra, was overseeing the construction of a new mining platform when the transmission reached her through the collective's communication network. Her compound eyes processed the information in milliseconds, but she paused in her work for the first time in months. The 4-armed insectoid remembered the human engineers who had visited their construction spheres 2 years ago. Most species guarded their technological secrets jealously, sharing only what they had to for diplomatic reasons. But the humans had been different. They had watched the collective's rapid construction techniques with genuine admiration, then freely shared their own methods for adaptive engineering. They had shown the insects how to modify designs on the fly, how to use available materials in unexpected ways, and how to build structures that could survive in hostile environments. Queen Builder buzzed one of her subordinates. The humans are preparing to help the Villani. Should we continue with our current projects? Jixra's antennae twitched as she considered. The collective rarely involved itself in the conflicts of other species. They preferred to build and create, rather than fight and destroy. But the humans had shared their knowledge freely, asking nothing in return. Perhaps it was time to return that kindness. Redirect Construction Group 7, she clicked to her workers. Prepare the mobile shipyards for departure. The most surprising response came from the crystal beings known as the Resonance. These mysterious entities lived in structures that seemed to be grown rather than built. Their bodies composed of living mineral that could reshape itself at will. They rarely communicated with biological species, considering themselves to be on a higher plane of existence. But the Resonance operated through quantum networks that spanned entire star systems. When the Villani distress call went out, it created ripples in the quantum field that the crystal beings couldn't ignore. For the first time in over 1,000 years, they called a full assembly to discuss intervention in biological affairs. The debate took place in harmonics that only they could hear, their crystal bodies ringing like bells as they communicated through sound and vibration. Some argued for their traditional isolation. Others pointed out that the humans had once helped a damaged resonant ship repair itself, even though they barely understood the technology involved. The vote was closer than it had been in millennia, but the decision was unanimous when it came. They would act. Across 3 different star systems, 3 very different species began preparing for war. None of them owed the Villani anything. None of them had official authorization from their governments. But all of them remembered human kindness when it had mattered most. The galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented, a coalition of unlikely allies, united not by politics or profit, but by shared respect for a species that helped others, without asking for anything in return. The humans had no idea that help was coming. The staging area, near Jupiter's massive moon, Ganymede, had never seen anything like it. What started as a routine deployment of the human 7th Fleet had transformed into something that defied every military manual in the galaxy. Ships from 4 different species floated in formation against the backdrop of Jupiter's swirling clouds, creating a sight that would have been impossible just days before. Commander G1 stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable, watching through the main view screen as more vessels continued to arrive. The human ships looked exactly like what they were, functional warships built by a species that valued efficiency over beauty. Their angular hulls were covered with sensor arrays and weapon mounts, painted in the dark gray that had become humanity's signature color in space. But the human vessels were dwarfed by their unexpected allies. The Saurian ships were works of art as much as instruments of war. Their hulls curved like the bodies of ancient sea creatures, covered in scales of metallic armor that gleamed red and gold in the light of the distant sun. Each ship looked alive, as if it might suddenly swim away through space, like some cosmic predator. Even more impressive were the collective's construction platforms. These weren't warships in the traditional sense. They were mobile factories, capable of building almost anything in the depths of space. Some were over 2 miles long, their surfaces covered with manufacturing bays and assembly arms that never stopped moving. Millions of insectoid workers swarmed over their hulls like ants, preparing equipment and supplies for the journey ahead. The most beautiful ships belonged to the Resonance. Their vessels looked like they had been carved from single massive gems, their crystal hulls catching and reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They didn't seem to follow the same rules of physics as everyone else. Instead of engines, they somehow manipulated space itself to move, leaving trails of rainbow light in their wake. Lieutenant Taman approached Giwan with a communication pad in his hands. "Commander, we're receiving final crew reports from all Allied vessels. Total personnel count is just over 15,000 across all 4 species." G1 nodded, still staring at the assembled fleet. 3 days ago, she had been planning to take 12 human ships on what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Now, she commanded an armada that represented some of the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. "Are the communication links established?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Universal translators are active across all ships. Everyone should be able to understand your address." G1 took a deep breath and activated the fleet-wide communication system. Holographic projectors throughout the armada came to life, showing her image to thousands of beings who had never worked together before. She could see humans on the bridges of their ships, reptilian saurians in their command centers, insectoid collective workers in their hive-like chambers, and the glowing forms of resonance in their crystal control rooms. "I know this situation is unusual," she began, her voice carrying across species barriers through the universal translators. "Most of you don't even know my name, and I don't know yours. We come from different worlds, different cultures, different ways of thinking about the universe." She paused, looking at the diverse faces watching her from screens throughout the fleet. Some had scales, some had compound eyes, some were made of living crystal, but all of them were here for the same reason. "We're not sailing toward certain victory today," G1 continued. "The math is simple. We're outnumbered, we're operating far from any support, and we're facing an enemy that has conquered half the galaxy. Any military strategist would tell us we're making a mistake." Through the communication links, she could see crews throughout the fleet listening intently. Human sailors stood alongside Saurian warriors. Collective workers paused in their endless tasks. Even the mysterious resonance seemed to be focusing their attention on her words. "But someone sent out a call for help," G1 said, her voice growing stronger. "Someone is facing extinction, and they asked the universe if anyone cared enough to stand with them. We're here because the answer is yes. We're here because when innocent people are threatened, good beings don't count the odds, they just act." She gestured toward the tactical display, showing their destination. "The Villani have never done anything for any of us. They can't offer us resources or technology or strategic advantages. They can only offer us the chance to do what's right." Throughout the fleet, crews were nodding, clicking, buzzing, or resonating their agreement, in whatever way their species expressed unity. The universal translators couldn't capture all the nuances, but the emotion was clear. "That's enough," G1 concluded. "That's always been enough." The fleet's jump drives began charging in perfect synchronization, filling space with the distinctive whine of hyperspace engines. On the edge of the Villani system, hegemony scout ships were reporting that their target was defenseless and ready for conquest. They had no idea what was coming. The paradise world of Kepler 44 to be had never known the horror of war. For thousands of years, the Villani had lived in harmony with their beautiful planet, building cities that looked more like works of art than places of habitation. There, crystal spires rose gracefully into the sky, connected by bridges of living light that pulsed with gentle energy. Gardens floated in the air between buildings, held aloft by the same mysterious technology that powered their civilization. But now their sky was on fire. Elder Solana pressed her delicate hands against the transparent walls of the emergency shelter, watching in horror as another section of the capital city disappeared in a ball of nuclear flame. The hegemony bombardment had been going on for 6 hours, and already a third of their world's population centers were gone. The Villani were a species of incredible beauty and fragility. Their bodies were humanoid, but covered in gossamer skin that shimmered with rainbow colors. From their backs sprouted wings that looked like they were made of stained glass, too delicate for flight but perfect for expressing emotion through color and movement. They had evolved from creatures that lived in harmony with their world's unique crystal formations, and their entire culture was built around peace, art, and the creation of beauty. They had no weapons. They had no military. The concept of deliberately harming another intelligent being was so foreign to them that they didn't even have words for many types of violence. Elder whispered young Zorali, her wings flickering with colors of fear and confusion. "The Eastern District. It's gone. All of it." Solana nodded sadly, her own wings drooping with grief. She was over 300 years old, ancient by Villani standards, and she had seen her people through many challenges. Natural disasters, resource shortages, even contact with other alien species, but nothing had prepared them for this systematic destruction. Around her in the evacuation center, Thousands of Vellani families huddled together. Parents wrapped their children in their wings, trying to shield them from the sight of their world burning. The youngsters' wings trembled with terror. They had no words to express. In Vellani culture, wings showed emotion. Right now, every wing in the shelter displayed the same heartbreaking pattern of fear and despair. Through the shelter's crystal walls, they could see the hegemony ships in orbit. The massive vessels looked like metal insects against the stars, bristling with weapon systems that could crack planets. Their bombardment cannons fired in steady rhythm, each shot erasing another piece of Vellani civilization from existence. "They're not even trying to conquer us," observed Veltar, one of the shelter's coordinators. "They're just destroying everything." Solana understood what he meant. The hegemony was known for enslaving conquered species, putting them to work in their vast industrial empire. But the Vellani had nothing the hegemony wanted, except their beautiful world itself. They were being exterminated simply to make room for hegemony colonists. Suddenly, the shelter's emergency communicator crackled to life. The voice that emerged was speaking in rapid, urgent tones in a language none of them recognized. But their universal translator was working, converting the alien words into something they could understand. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected in the outer system. Unknown fleet composition. Energy readings are. This can't be right. Dozens of ships just dropped out of jump space. Solana felt her wings flutter with the first hope she had experienced in days. Could it be? Had someone actually responded to their distress call? Through the shelter's observatory equipment, they watched as space itself seemed to tear open at the edge of their system. Ship after ship emerged from hyperspace, vessels unlike anything the Vellani had ever seen. Some were angular and functional, others curved like living creatures. The largest ones looked like floating cities, while others gleamed like jewels against the darkness. Then the communication came through on all frequencies, translated into perfect Vellani by universal communicators. "This is Commander G1 of the Terran Defense Fleet, Deathworlder Coalition responding to your distress call. We're here to help." The shelter fell silent, except for the gentle chiming of Vellani wings, expressing amazement. None of them had ever heard of humans or the other species in this Deathworlder Coalition, but they were here, arriving just as the hegemony prepared for the final assault on the planet's surface. Elder whispered Zarali, her wings now flickering with rainbow patterns of hope. "What are Deathworlders?" Solana didn't know, but as she watched the unknown fleet take position between the hegemony ships and her dying world, she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had sent them. For the first time since the bombardment began, her wings showed colors of hope instead of despair. Someone had heard their call. Someone had come to help. Against all odds, they were no longer alone in the darkness. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Vexamor had conquered 47 worlds in his long career with the Hegemony Empire. He had faced every type of enemy the galaxy could produce. Warrior species that fought with honor. Technological civilizations that relied on superior firepower, and desperate defenders making their last stand. He thought he had seen every possible tactic and strategy. He was wrong. Standing on the bridge of his flagship Dominator, Vexamor stared at the tactical display with growing bewilderment. The enemy fleet that had just arrived was doing things that violated every principle of sensible space warfare he had learned in 30 years of military service. "Sir, the human vessels are moving into the asteroid belt," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Threxka. "They're using the debris field as cover." "Impossible," Vexamor muttered, zooming in on the display. "Those asteroids are moving at incredible speeds. The gravitational forces alone should crush their ships." But somehow, the human vessels were dancing between chunks of rock the size of small moons, using their engines in ways that should have torn their ships apart. They would disappear behind an asteroid, then emerge somewhere completely unexpected, firing precise shots at his ships before vanishing again into the deadly maze of space debris. Even more disturbing was what the reptilian ships were doing. Saurian heavy cruisers, each one nearly as large as his own flagship, were charging directly at his battle line. It was the kind of suicidal tactic that military academies used as examples of what not to do. "Admiral, the Saurian ships are on collision course with our forward squadron," called out his weapons officer. "Should we concentrate fire on them?" "Do it," Veximer ordered. "Focus all batteries on those charging ships." The hegemony fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, and nuclear torpedoes all streaked toward the approaching Saurian vessels. By all rights, they should have been vaporized instantly. Instead, the Saurian ships kept coming. Their armor was unlike anything Veximer had ever seen. It seemed to absorb and redirect energy, instead of simply resisting it. The scales on their hulls glowed brighter with each hit, as if they were somehow feeding on the weapon's fire. But what made the tactic work wasn't just the Saurian armor, it was the way the human ships supported them. While the hegemony focused their fire on the charging cruisers, human vessels darted in from impossible angles, jamming targeting systems and disrupting communications. They coordinated their attacks with precision that suggested they had been fighting together for years, instead of days. "Sir, new contacts behind the main enemy formation," reported the sensor operator. "The insectoid ships are building something." Veximer switched his display to show the rear of the battlefield. The massive collective construction platforms had positioned themselves behind the main fighting, and were working at incredible speed to assemble defensive structures from space debris. They were literally building fortifications in the middle of a battle, using wreckage from destroyed asteroids, and even pieces of damaged ships. "How fast are they working?" he asked. "Sir, they're completing defensive platforms faster than our weapons can destroy them. Each platform they finish makes the next one easier to build." It was like fighting an enemy that grew stronger the longer the battle continued. Every piece of debris in the system was being turned into part of their defensive network. But the most unsettling sight was what the crystal ships were doing. The resonant vessels had spread out through the system in a complex geometric pattern, their faceted hulls catching and focusing the light from the system's star. Somehow, they were turning stellar radiation into directed energy weapons of impossible power. "Admiral," called his science officer, her voice tight with disbelief. "The crystal ships are manipulating solar radiation at the quantum level. They're creating focused beam weapons, using the star itself as a power source." Veximer watched in horror as beams of concentrated starlight lanced out from the crystal ships, slicing through his heaviest armor like it was made of paper. These weren't weapons in any conventional sense. They were using the fundamental forces of the universe as artillery. "Sir, casualty reports are coming in," Threxka reported. "We've lost 7 ships in the first 10 minutes of engagement. Enemy losses are ... minimal." "How is that possible?" Veximer demanded. "We outnumber them 3-1. They're not fighting like any military force we've encountered," his tactical officer explained. "They're using the environment as a weapon, supporting each other in ways that seem impossible, and they're adapting their tactics faster than we can respond." Veximer studied the battle display more carefully. The enemy wasn't just using unconventional tactics. They were fighting like they had grown up in hostile environments where adaptation meant survival. The humans navigated asteroid fields like they were calm oceans. The Saurians charged into overwhelming firepower like it was a minor inconvenience. The insects built defenses, while under fire, as if construction and combat were the same activity. "Sir," whispered his communications officer, "intercepted transmissions suggest these species call themselves Deathworlders." The word sent a chill through Veximer's spine. He had heard rumors about Deathworlder species, beings that had evolved on worlds so dangerous that they had developed into something unprecedented. Species that treated impossible odds as motivation rather than deterrent. Looking at the tactical display again, everything suddenly made sense. These weren't conventional military forces following standard doctrine. These were survivors from worlds that had tried to kill them every day of their evolution. They had learned to fight not just enemies, but hostile environments, impossible physics, and the universe itself. For the first time in his career, Admiral Veximer began to wonder if the hegemony might actually lose a battle. The battle had been raging for 6 brutal hours, and the Indomitable was dying around Commander G1. What had started as a coordinated assault by the Deathworlder coalition had devolved into a desperate struggle for survival. The ship's hull groaned under the stress of repeated plasma cannon hits, and emergency lights flickered throughout the bridge as power systems struggled to keep functioning. Through the main view screen, G1 could see the wreckage of the battle scattered across space. Pieces of human, Saurian, collective, and resonant ships drifted among the debris, testament to the ferocity of the fighting. But for every Allied ship lost, the hegemony had paid a heavy price too. Admiral Veximer's fleet had been reduced from 60 ships to less than 40. But that still gave them overwhelming numerical superiority. The tactical display painted a grim picture. Red warning lights covered most of the ship's systems, indicating critical damage throughout the vessel. The port engine was completely destroyed. The main weapons array was operating at 30% capacity, and hull breaches had been reported on 7 different decks. In the medical bay 3 levels below, Dr. Youngsu was performing surgery on his 4th patient of the hour. The wounded came from all 4 species in the coalition: humans with plasma burns, saurians with shattered scales, collective workers with severed limbs, and even a resonant whose crystalline structure had been fractured by enemy fire. "Doctor, we need you in Section C," called Nurse Hyjin over the intercom. "We've got a saurian with internal bleeding, and a human with severe radiation exposure." Young-Soo wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the collective worker on his operating table. The insectoid's 4 arms were twitching as his surgical equipment worked to repair damage to its thorax. "Almost done here," he muttered, his hands steady, despite the ship shaking around him from enemy weapons fire. The doctor had volunteered for this mission knowing it would be dangerous, but nothing had prepared him for treating wounds from weapons designed to kill multiple species. Each race had different biology, different tolerances for pain and injury. What would kill a human might barely slow down a saurian, while treatments that saved collective workers could be toxic to resonance. On the bridge, Lieutenant Tommen was struggling to keep damage control systems online. His console showed a maze of red indicators as he tried to reroute power around destroyed systems. "Commander, we've lost the starboard weapons array completely. Port shields are down to 15%. Engineering reports were losing atmosphere on decks 5 through 7. G1 nodded grimly, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. The mathematics of the battle were brutal and simple. Despite their tactical advantages and unconventional strategies, the hegemony's superior numbers were slowly grinding them down. For every enemy ship they destroyed, the coalition lost half a ship of their own. At this rate, they would be completely eliminated within 2 hours. "Status of the other coalition ships?" she asked. "The Saurian flagship Bloodfang has taken heavy damage but is still fighting. 3 of the collective construction platforms have been destroyed, but the survivors are still building defensive structures. The resonant vessels... double quotes. Taman paused, consulting his readings. "The resonant ships are pushing their star manipulation weapons beyond safe parameters. They're generating more power, but their crystal matrices are starting to fracture." Through the bridge's side windows, G1 could see the beautiful blue-green world of the Villani below them. Even from this distance, she could see the orange glow of fires burning across its surface. Hegemony bombardment ships were still systematically destroying population centers, and streams of refugee ships were fleeing the planet in desperate attempts to reach safety. She thought about the evacuation vessels she could see on her sensors. Thousands of Villani families packed into ships that were never designed for long-distance travel. Their gossamer wings would be trembling with fear as they watched their homeworld burn behind them. Many of those ships would never find another habitable world. The refugees would die slowly in the cold emptiness of space, their beautiful culture extinct forever. Commander, Taman said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. We've done everything we could. Maybe it's time to consider withdrawal. We could escort the refugee ships to safety, help them find a new home. G1 looked at the tactical display. One more time. The hegemony flagship Dominator sat at the center of the enemy formation. Its massive bulk bristling with weapons that had claimed dozens of coalition ships. Admiral Veximer was aboard that vessel, directing the systematic destruction of everything the Deathworlder coalition had fought to protect. For a moment, she thought about her daughter Minyoung back on Earth, the 8-year-old girl who always waited by the window when her mother's ship was due to return from patrol. G1 had promised her daughter that she would always come home, no matter how dangerous the mission. But then she looked again at the Villani world below, at the refugee ships fleeing with nowhere to go, at the systematic extermination of an entire peaceful species. Some promises were more important than personal ones. No, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge. Lieutenant Taman set course for the hegemony flagship. All remaining power to engines. Commander, Taman's voice was uncertain. G1's hands moved across her command console, entering authorization codes that would override all safety protocols. Ramming speed, Lieutenant. We're going to end this. The Indomitable streaked across the battlefield like a comet, its engines pushed far beyond their design limits. Commander G1 sat in her captain's chair, watching through the main view screen, as the hegemony flagship Dominator grew larger and larger. Around her, the bridge crew worked with calm efficiency, knowing exactly what was about to happen. All hands, brace for impact, G1 announced over the ship's communication system. It has been an honor serving with you. The human flagship struck the Dominator at nearly half the speed of light, its reinforced bow punching through armor plating that had withstood 1,000 battles. For a split second, the two massive vessels seemed frozen together in space. Then both ships disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire that could be seen from the surface of the Villani world below. The explosion sent shockwaves through both fleets, but its impact went far beyond the physical destruction of two ships. Every vessel in the Deathworlder coalition had watched their human commander sacrifice herself and her crew to strike at the heart of the enemy formation. The example she set rippled outward like waves in a pond, inspiring acts of heroism that would be remembered for generations. On the Saurian heavy cruiser Bloodfang, Captain Morthok watched the fireball fade and felt something ancient stir in his warrior's heart. The scarred reptilian commander had fought in dozens of battles, but he had never seen anything like the courage the human commander had just displayed. "Weapons officer," he growled to his subordinate. "Target the enemy. Dreadnought directly ahead of us." "Sir, we don't have enough firepower to penetrate their armor," the younger Saurian replied. Morthok's yellow eyes glowed with fierce determination. "We don't need to penetrate it. We need to ram it." He opened a ship-wide communication channel and began to sing in the ancient language of his people, the death song that Saurian warriors had sung for 10,000 years when facing impossible odds. His crew took up the song, their reptilian voices creating harmonies that resonated through the ship's hull. Other Saurian vessels heard the song and joined in, creating a choir of warriors accepting death for the sake of strangers they had never met. The Bloodfang accelerated toward the enemy dreadnought, its armored hull glowing red-hot from weapons fire. Behind it, two more Saurian ships followed the same course, their crews singing the same ancient song their ancestors had sung when defending their homeworld from invasion. Meanwhile, the collective's construction platforms were performing their own form of heroism. Instead of fleeing when the hegemony concentrated fire on them, the massive vessels accelerated their building efforts. Millions of insectoid workers swarmed over damaged Allied ships, constructing armor plating and defensive barriers even as enemy plasma bolts scorched the space around them, Queen Builder Jixra coordinated the effort from her command platform, her forearms moving in complex patterns as she directed construction crews across multiple ships simultaneously. When a human destroyer lost its shields and came under heavy fire, collective workers immediately began building a protective shell around it, working so fast that armor plating appeared faster than enemy weapons could destroy it. Priority construction. Around damaged resonant vessel, Jixra clicked to her workers. Protective barrier must be completed before structural collapse. The insects worked with single-minded determination, many of them dying from enemy fire as they welded armor plates into place. But for every worker that fell, 2 more took their place. Driven by their queen's example and the memory of human kindness, the most spectacular response came from the mysterious resonance. These crystal beings had always remained aloof from the conflicts of biological species, but something about the human commander's sacrifice had touched even their alien consciousness. Instead of maintaining their distant formation, the resonant ships moved closer to the Villani world itself. They arranged themselves in a perfect geometric pattern around the planet, their crystal hulls beginning to resonate in harmony with each other. The stellar energy they had been using as weapons was now being channeled into something else, entirely a planetary defense grid that could absorb and redirect any amount of energy directed at the world below. When hegemony bombardment ships fired their massive cannons at the planet's surface, the energy was absorbed by the resonant grid and reflected back at the attacking vessels. The crystal ships were taking enormous damage from handling such massive amounts of power, their faceted hulls beginning to crack and fracture. But they held their positions. Admiral Veximer watched his tactical display in growing horror as his entire battle plan collapsed around him. This wasn't how warfare was supposed to work. Losing commanders should cause their forces to retreat or surrender. Damaged ships should withdraw for repairs. Outnumbered fleets should attempt to escape while they still could. Instead, his enemies were fighting harder the more desperate their situation became. Every loss seemed to inspire them to greater acts of heroism. They were treating certain death as if it were a minor inconvenience, sacrificing themselves for a species they had never even met before this battle. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice shaking with disbelief, "we've lost 12 more ships in the last 10 minutes. The enemy casualties are. They're not retreating. They're not even trying to save themselves." Veximer stared at the battle display, watching as Saurian ships rammed his dreadnoughts, collective workers built defenses under fire, and resonant vessels absorbed planet-killing weapons with their own bodies. For the first time in his long military career, he was facing an enemy that considered victory less important than doing what was right. These weren't soldiers following orders, or even patriots defending their homeworld. These were something the galaxy had never seen before, beings willing to die for strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. The hegemony was losing, and Veximer was beginning to understand why. The silence that followed the battle was almost deafening. For the first time in over 200 years, a hegemony fleet was retreating in complete disorder. Admiral Veximer's remaining ships limped away from the Villani system, their hulls scarred and their crews shaken by what they had witnessed. The mighty empire that had conquered dozens of worlds had been stopped by a coalition of species, fighting for nothing more than the right thing to do. On the surface of the Villani homeworld, Elder Solana emerged from the emergency shelter where her people had huddled during the bombardment. The crystal city around her was in ruins. Beautiful spires that had taken centuries to grow now lay, shattered like broken glass. But overhead, the sky was no longer filled with the orange glow of destruction. Instead, pieces of debris from the space battle twinkled like new stars, creating strange constellations that would remind future generations of the day strangers came to save them. The first thing Solana noticed was the sound of construction. Collective drones were already swarming over the ruins, their insectoid forms moving with incredible speed as they began salvaging materials from the battlefield debris. They worked alongside Vellani civilians, their different biologies, somehow finding ways to cooperate despite never having met before. Elder, called young Zarali, her gossamer wings flickering with amazement. The crystal beings are singing too. Our city. Solana looked up to see several resonant ships hovering over the damaged crystal spires. The mysterious beings were producing complex harmonies that seemed to resonate through the very structure of matter itself. As their song continued, she watched in wonder as the broken crystals began to regrow, their faceted surfaces slowly regenerating according to patterns encoded in sound and vibration near the medical district. Human doctors were working alongside Vellani healers to treat the wounded from both species. Dr. Young-Soo, one of the few survivors from the Indomitable, was teaching Vellani medics how to treat plasma burns while learning their techniques for healing crystalline tissue damage. Your methods are so different from ours, observed healer Ciliana, watching as Young-Soo used mechanical instruments to repair damaged wing membranes. But they work remarkably well. That's what makes cooperation valuable, Young-Soo replied, carefully stitching gossamer tissue that was thinner than paper. We all bring different strengths to the same problems. The news of the Vellani victory spread across the galaxy faster than the fastest starships. In the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council, representatives who had voted against intervention just days before now scrambled to understand what had happened. Emergency sessions were called as reports flooded in from across known space. The hegemony fleet has withdrawn from 3 additional systems, reported the arachnid representative, her mandibles clicking nervously. Species that have been under their control for decades are declaring independence. Elder Veltar, the tree-like being who had predicted human involvement, stood at the center of the council chamber. The Deathworlder coalition has accomplished in one battle what we have failed to do in centuries of diplomacy. Perhaps it is time we acknowledged that. The formal recognition came within a week. The Galactic Council officially recognized the Deathworlder coalition as a legitimate peacekeeping force, with authority to respond to distress calls from any species requesting aid. It was an unprecedented decision that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. On Earth, Captain Minho stood in his new office at Terra Defense Headquarters, reading reports that still seemed impossible to believe. He had been promoted to Admiral after G1's sacrifice, a responsibility he had never wanted, but now embraced with determination. Sir, reported Lieutenant Sujin, now his aide-de-camp, we're receiving requests for assistance from 17 different star systems. Species that have been oppressed by the hegemony for generations are asking for coalition protection. Minho studied the star maps, showing the locations of the requests. They were scattered across thousands of light-years from the rim worlds, where desperate colonies scratched out existence on hostile planets. 2 core systems where ancient civilizations had been ground down by centuries of hegemony rule. What's our current fleet strength? He asked. Growing every day, sir. The Saurians have pledged their remaining assault flotillas. The collective is building new construction platforms, specifically for coalition use. Even species we've never heard of are volunteering ships and personnel. Through his office window, Minho could see the construction yards where new coalition vessels were being built. Human engineering was being combined with Saurian armor technology, collective rapid construction techniques, and resonant energy manipulation systems. The resulting ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But what impressed him most were the messages flooding in from across known space. The Vellani had renamed their world Haven of the Brave in honor of those who had died defending it. Skuan's final transmission had been recorded and was now being broadcast on emergency frequencies throughout the galaxy, inspiring oppressed species everywhere. Her words had become a rallying cry that echoed from the outer rim to the galactic core. We don't fight because we can win. We fight because it's right. The age of the Deathworlder coalition had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in centuries, hope was spreading faster than fear. and the weak had protectors who asked for nothing in return except the chance to do what was right. The universe had learned what humans had always known. Sometimes the only victory that matters is the one that saves innocent lives, regardless of the cost.